So this camera used to cost $80,000 and now you can get into the same system for around $4,000 to $5,000, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Because normally when something drops that much in price, there's a reason. With this, the Red DSMC2 camera range is not quite that simple, which is why in 2026 we offer brand new DSMC2 products. So what's happened over the last few years is that these cameras have dropped in price significantly. They've ended up sitting right now next to modern mirrorless cameras. So now you've got this strange situation where you're choosing between a brand new hybrid camera or a cinema camera that used to be used on high-end productions across the world. And those things are fundamentally very different. Because when Red designed DSMC2 cameras, they weren't trying to hit the consumer price point. They were building a professional cinema camera platform without the same constraints you get in modern kind of mirrorless cameras, and that shows up in a lot of ways. So the first one is the image. A lot of these cameras, especially the ones with the Dragon sensor, which is what we're filming on right now, that has a really long development cycle. It started in DSMC1, carried through to DSMC2, and by the time it got to DSMC2 and the end of that life cycle, the Dragon sensor in particular was at the pinnacle of what it could achieve. Very stable kind of color behavior and performance, and just generally a very well-respected image. So that's why so many products were shot, especially on that sensor, and why it still has a very recognizable look. Even now, if you take one of these cameras and put some good lenses on it, go out and shoot, it doesn't feel like you're using something old, it doesn't feel video-ish, it feels very distinct and filmic in a way that many cameras don't. And what's interesting is that it carries into the lower end models as well. We're shooting on a Raven right now, and that kind of DNA is still in there. It still has a Dragon sensor, still has a very iconic looking image, and that doesn't go away when you're buying into a cheaper body. Another thing that aged really well is the resolution. So most DSMC2 cameras sit around 4.5K to 5K range, which is actually really a very practical place to be in. You've got enough resolution to kind of oversample to 4K, reframe, stabilize, crop if you need to, but you're not dealing with massive inefficient files. It's just a very sensible balance, and I think that's probably one of the main reasons these cameras still feel so usable today. They're not like chasing crazy like specs like 12K, 70K. It just feels very sensible for most work that you're doing with these sort of cameras. And then there's the way the camera is built. These cameras are built like tanks, they're completely modular, and that's something that's kind of disappeared from lots of cameras. You can strip this camera right down. It's got different modules like monitor, side handle, rear, V-lock adapter. You can rig it exactly how you want it with the proper power monitoring and any accessories you need, and everything integrates properly into the system. As you can see right now, this is completely cableless. This is my setup. I love it exactly like this. It bounces perfectly. We've got our Fujinon MK1855 on here with our single X adapter. And this setup for me with no wires is perfect. I love operating kind of behind this camera as it is right now. And then if I want to, I can move them onto the side, have it as a kind of tripod-based setup. It just works very well for the way you want to use it. And because so many of the accessories, like I was saying, are modular and are cableless, they just rely on pogo pins to kind of carry power to those modules. You do end up with a very neat looking system. And that's quite a big difference in comparison to a lot of modern cameras, which tend to be much more fixed in how they're meant to be used. So, and another thing that is quite unique to these cameras is just how flexible they are in the way you use them. So even the menus, all the menus are kind of beautifully laid out, logically laid out. You even like have certain search functions to search for very specific settings. Things you need quickly aren't hidden away. If you want to go, change your iris, shutter speed, ISO, you can do those very quickly, all from a tap and a swipe. There's also a lot of documentation inside the camera itself. If you want to know about a certain feature, you can search and find documentation for that feature within the camera, which is such a cool feature, and I haven't actually seen that anywhere else on any other camera. And then in terms of how you actually set it up, on all your accessories and on the camera itself and on the monitor, you have function buttons. So you can set these up to exactly how you want to use them. So say you want to have it as a run and gun setup and you want to have quick things like magnify up here, or you want to have geoscopes or certain things that you rely on really quickly, you can map it to buttons that you are very quickly able to access. And you can shoot, like different people will set up the camera depending on how they want to shoot it. And you can create user profiles, so you could have a user profile for run and gun, you could have it for studio work, you could have it for more kind of theatrical work with your grid lines, or any other things that you require for that sort of work. And the other cool thing is you can save your profiles to your mini mag or Nexa mag and transfer it between cameras, and it will take a matter of seconds to get that camera set up exactly the same way. Now, one thing that does change is how you actually shoot with these cameras. These are very manual cameras. You don't have any real kind of autofocus system built in, like modern mirrorless cameras rely on. And for some people, that can be a deal breaker. But what you do gain is a huge amount of control. You're fully in charge of what's in focus, your exposure, everything that's happening to the image, you're kind of making a conscious decision about. For loads of types of work like narrative, documentary, or anything where you want that control, that can be a real benefit rather than a downside. It forces you to be more deliberate in the way you're shooting, and you end up with a different level of precision because of that. Another big difference compared to mirrorless is how the footage is recorded. So a lot of modern cameras rely quite heavily on compression, especially when you start to kind of push into higher frame rates. You might see certain cameras advertising as having, say, 300 frames per second, but it doesn't say the bit rate that that kind of operates at in those modes, and the image can completely fall apart at that frame rate. And a big part of why it holds up so well comes down to how red code actually encodes the image. It uses a wavelet compression. Most codecs use a H.264 or H.265, and those are temporarily compressed. They don't store every frame as a complete image. They would store one frame as a full frame and then just record exactly what has changed in the image after that, which is fine for delivery. But when you kind of start pushing a grade or trying to recover something, the data actually isn't there, as that codec was never keeping it. Wavelet works differently. Every frame is its own complete image. So when you're in DaVinci and you're trying to pull back a shadow, you actually have something to work with. And you can dial the compression ratio to exactly what you want, 3:1, 8:1. So you're very consciously making a call on file size versus quality. So if this is still as good as I'm saying, why have they come down so much in price? Well, the first one is the obvious one. It's a legacy camera system with the last models kind of stopping around 2022, 2023. So naturally, there's a price decrease because this is considered older technology, especially on the used and secondhand market. Another reason as well is support. Red doesn't actively support or repair these cameras in the same way they have in the past. And that can sound like a big risk, but the reality is these cameras were designed to last. I've repaired and used cameras with well over 3,500 hours on them, which is kind of the best part of half a year. These cameras were also designed to be serviced. They're much closer to a computer internally than a modern sealed mirrorless camera, which means they can actually be repaired by the right people. I've had my time doing DSMC2 repair, and we recently released a video showing a full teardown and repair of one of these cameras, and they are very repairable. But if you're looking at this purely from an image and system perspective, you're essentially getting access to something that used to sit at the very top end of the industry for a fraction of the original price. And obviously the image hasn't changed, it's exactly the same as it always was. That's why people are still using these cameras, even alongside much newer systems, because they still match and they still hold up. And that's a big part of why we built so many products around DSMC2. We built Nexa Mag, which is a brand new SSD for DSMC2 cameras, a lens mount that allows you to use B4 lenses on DSMC2, a mount for the Fujinon MK lenses, which is the first of its type, allowing you to use them with DSMC1 and DSMC2. And we are currently working on a new focal reducer for DSMC2 cameras. So let us know in the comments what you think of this video, and anyone that's shooting on these cameras, share your experience, let the kind of community know how you got on with them, and we'll see you in the next video.